you very much for having me here today. I'm very, very excited. My sister, my late sister, was diagnosed with RSD back in 2006, and I called one of my dearest and closest friends, who's a leading neurologist in the country, dealing with pain and actually with headaches and migraines and whatnot. And he's in Dallas, Texas, by the way. And he just kind of laughed, and he's like, yeah, she's sure, Well, when I told him I was doing this conference, 2018, go ahead 12 years, he started saying, oh, well, there's some excellent research on this. And so congratulations to all your organizations and the tireless work you've done to push for education and research in this area to legitimize the suffering that otherwise people looked and judged. So I take my hats off to all of you for that. And I'd like to thank Michelle McBride for thinking of me as to come here and share the message of what we've been doing. I own Aunt Zelda's, which is a R&D company. We've been making products for over 7 years now to treat serious diseases. We use that research and all the data we've been collecting on patients to then fund preclinical and clinical trials around the world through Zelda Therapeutics. So I've been taking what we learn here and then trying to legitimize it in such a way with actual real research that doctors and government officials will not poo-poo as not real science. You're welcome. And then one of our nurses, we have Calla Spring Wellness, which is a medical practice that we started a number of years ago to train medical professionals on understanding and working with the endocannabinoid system, which is an endogenous system within our bodies that exists that is not taught about in medical school. So can you imagine going to medical school and you're a physician and you put all your studies and your work, and maybe you're in your 40s and you're still paying off student loans, and all of a sudden they tell you there's this entire system that's job is to encourage homeostasis within the systems in your body, and they didn't ever bother to teach you about it. So a lot of doctors saying, well, it doesn't exist, and then the doctors that have more of the scientific bend to them and aren't just tradesmen, they're the ones say, I want to know and I want to learn about this. So our medical professionals they work with patients, they actually work along with your other physicians to help to accentuate the care you get so that you can have understanding of this system. Because it's not about the cannabis itself, it's about how the cannabis works within your body and what is actually happening. And it's real science and it's real chemistry. And so I'm going to take you on that journey now. So the first thing that I want to say is that, and anyone that's ever heard me speak, is I always start with this slide because I think it's so important. Because if your sources of information are Facebook, we used to call them the Yahoo groups, but I don't even know if they exist anymore. But Instagram or just in general going online, Twitter, etc. What you're going to see is that cannabis is a panacea, that it cures cancer, that it cures this, that it's you don't throw out your other treatments. We have a specialty in cancer, and in particular in pediatrics, and I've had parents come to me and say that they were getting really, really negative postings on their pages because they decided to go ahead and do concurrent treatments, integrated treatments of chemotherapies and radiations, even though these things have been shown to be very effective, and when they're done in conjunction with cannabinoids, people are like, if you're doing cannabis, you need to reject these others. And that's just not true, because cannabis is not, in fact, a panacea. It is amazing, amazing, amazing what it's good for. But it's also, there's a whole lot of things that it just doesn't touch. I'll give you an example. DIPG, which is, there's a lot of healthcare professionals here in the room, so I think that you'll understand that this is a type of cancer that's it's at the brainstem, and there are no cannabinoid receptors in the brainstem, which is very good and bad. On one hand, you cannot overdose from cannabis, you can overdose and feel like crap for a few hours and wish you were dead, and anyone who's ever taken an edible can attest to that. But, right? But there's no fatal overdose because there are no receptors, so you cannot flood them and overdose on that. Now here I'm showing you a list of conditions. A wonderful resource, and I understand Martin Lee was here at one of your previous conferences, the founder of Project CBD, and at the bottom of their pages they list the medical conditions that we have really solid evidence based on it working for. That doesn't mean it only works for those, and it doesn't mean it's going to work for you if that happens to be your diagnosis, but this is a good starting point on that. Now here's a listing of state-approved conditions. If you live, for example, in Illinois, then CRPS is listed as an approved condition specifically. If you happen to live in Arizona, it's not. If you happen, so we have very, very unequal access to medicine based upon legislative decisions that are being made on what constitutes medicine in a viable option for patients and what doesn't. So it's very important that you use your voice and your pen to contact whoever the people are that sit on your, whatever your boards are, whether it's a governmental board, city council, county council, etc., to fight for your right to use whatever medicine that your doctor deems beneficial. Now in California we're very fortunate that when the wording was put together for the Compassionate Use Act, where we've been using cannabis successfully now in California as a medicine, and not the wink wink it's a medicine, but a real medicine option for many, many, many patients. It's been left up to the discretion of the medical professional to decide if a patient can or cannot benefit potentially from cannabis. So, you know, think about that in terms of gabapentin, Neurontin. Let's look at Neurontin. It is being used off-label more than it's being used on-label. Yet your doctor doesn't have to go to a guideline and say, am I allowed to prescribe this? Well, let me call the legislator from my district and find out if it's okay if I prescribe. The doctor gets to be the doctor. In California, we give them the respect of knowing more about the body than the people sitting in the government official are. Now, and I want to go ahead and make now since January 1st, our whole world has changed with regulated system here in California, now that we have adult use. So in the past, it was required that you went to what I call a doc in the box, because to me it was just kind of a swindle, that you paid your $35 to $100, $200, and some doctor who couldn't make it as a doctor would write a prescription and say, yeah, or write the equivalent, excuse me, of a recommendation and say, yeah, I think you'll benefit. Just, you know, usually they would send it to you before they'd even seen you. I mean, it was really kind of a scam-like situation, but it was how people could legally use it and have the opportunity to even acquire it through a dispensary. As of January 1st, if you are over 21 years old and you have a federally issued government ID, you can walk into any dispensary in California and buy cannabis, as long as it is in an area where adult use is allowed. I live, for example, out in Bodega Bay, which is unincorporated Sonoma County. Sonoma County has only recognized medical. It has not set up laws yet for the opening of any dispensaries or any kind of products that are for medical use. And there are some issues, I mean, but then they have things like Sebastopol that has allowed for adult use, and Santa Rosa that has allowed adult use. So, I mean, we really do still have to navigate through the system to either get our cards, if we live in an area where it's almost being penalized for living in an area that doesn't allow adult use, or we can just go into any dispensary and get it now if it's in an area that does allow it. The further complication, though, is that the products and the medicines that are available on the adult use side are not the same products that are available on the medical side. So you cannot walk in as a patient without a card or without a recommendation letter and say, I want to get the medical products over there. They'll say, sorry, those are only available for the people that have those cards. You only can pick from these. And the adult use ones do not tend to be the products that I would necessarily recommend for most of the people that are looking to have cannabis be a medicine and not a lifestyle. So we have a lot more work to do. It's brand new. Everything is still in a state of flux. So hopefully at the end of the day, we'll have more options for everybody here in California. So the common symptoms, obviously, nobody here needs me to tell you. Nobody needs me to tell you what the symptoms are of this debilitating and chronic condition. But it is, of course, the chronic intense pain that's out of proportion to the severity of the injury. And that's, I think, the most important part, is because that's like, and I loved that Harry Potter thing of, yes, of course it's in your brain, and so, of course it's in your brain, but everything that you feel is in your brain. It doesn't mean that it's not legitimate. And so the cycle of pain, and I threw this in here. I could have put in here, I actually thought about putting insult instead of injury, because it can be something as simple as a pinprick that does not seem like an injury. It just seems like an occurrence of something, an insult to your skin, and then it turns into something else. But you have the pain, the injury, it causes the pain, then you can't sleep, and then you have more stress, and then you have more pain, and then you have, or is the injury causes more stress, and then you can't sleep, and then you have more pain, or is the stress what has you in a position where you're more vulnerable, and you experience the injury in a way that maybe you wouldn't have if you hadn't had that stress initially, that can then result in the pain and the sleep. I taught a class recently on chronic pain, and I spent, I would say I spent about 3/4 of the talk on sleep. And people were like, why are you talking about sleep? This is a pain class. And it's like, you don't sleep, you're going to hurt. And whatever hurt you have is going to be magnified. And like I said, hearing the earlier speakers, I was so awed by how open-minded these particular physicians and therapists are. And I'm going to definitely be referring patients to them in the future. So here is just information that I found that I thought was very interesting. This was a study that was done. I believe they surveyed 11,000 people, and they were looking at what other alternative treatments they had tried for pain. And everything from massage, prayer, yoga, meditation. I would say prayer and meditation probably are not so dissimilar, yet it's interesting that the percentage of people that perceive them in one way or the other. And then of course cannabis, 18% had tried of this 11,000. And here are the people who said that it actually helped to relieve their pain. These are, obviously massage has been very helpful. But a problem with massage, and for a lot of people, is you have a massage, you feel great, then you get in your car and drive home, and the act of driving home puts you back in the pain state. So if you could just get those therapists to come to your house every day, would all be good. But then cannabis, as you see, it was at 80% said that they found some level of relief using cannabinoid therapies. This is an amazing number. Think about it. What are the results of using NSAIDs? How many people are finding, significant relief with gabapentin or Botox injections for just, how many people are really getting the results? And if 80% can get results with this, it's something that we still really need to give a more serious look at. So here are some of the more common non-surgical treatments for CRPS. And I was looking at some of these, I was looking through, and I'm like, yep, all these. And then I started looking at the side effects. Oh my God, the liver damage, the kidney damage, the inability to drive a car because you're too medicated and you're drooling. You're in a chair because you can't get up and walk, and you have to worry about having someone support you because you're going to tip over from having that fentanyl patch. That sort of thing. It's really, really unfortunate that these are still the options that are available right now from the pharmaceutical industry. We need to encourage them to actually do more research, especially on the orphan conditions that so many of us are faced with. So in states, now this is an interesting slide, because in states where cannabis has been legalized, they have shown that there has been, and I can't read on this thing here, but there have been over 1,800 less prescriptions that are being written for pain medications in those states. You know, everybody talks about the opioid crisis and all this and that, and if doctors don't have any other options, what are they going to do? Because frankly, when a patient walks into an office, you go see your doctor, and you're going to go for a visit, and you say, I've got this terrible situation, I'm suffering, da-da-da-da, and you walk out without a piece of paper with a prescription or with something that's been, you know, electronically sent over to your pharmacy, you're going to feel like, oh, he didn't do anything for me, or she didn't do anything for me. Well, the reality is, so they end up, oh, it didn't work, well, they add another drug. They don't take one away, they just add another. And then you have people that are on 10 drugs, 11 drugs, 20 drugs, and all these things, and so they have no quality of life, and yet they're suffering still just the same, because, you know, where a lot of these things are fine if you've got acute conditions, when you have chronic, it just doesn't make a difference. But it also has been a major, major significant change in sleep drugs that are being prescribed for. I'm sure that the drug companies are not thrilled that less opioids and you know, less Ambien and Lyra are being written for, but the fact is that they are. And also in depression and anxiety. There's been incredible reduction in prescriptions having to be written for these conditions when you put cannabis as an option into the mix. So, as I said here, chronic pain is in fact the disease itself. And that's what we're all facing here, is it's a legitimate thing that has no reasonable purpose for being anymore. It just is on its own, and it has become the disease. And with this being, you know, the types of areas where people will have their symptoms and their pain from CRPS, this is in fact a very, very high-level area of showing that the cannabinoid receptors in our body that are perfectly placed to help us to help us to address these using cannabinoids. Okay. So I want to go through here just showing you a little bit of the literature. This is a tiny little look through it. Obviously, if you want more, I'm always available to send it your way. But the National Academy of Sciences did a very, very extensive study. They brought in all sorts of medical professionals, specialists. Donald Abrams, for example, from UCSF, who's an oncologist and integrative medicine specialist. They brought in all sorts of other people to look at all the existing literature out there and all the studies that have been done. Now, cannabis, everybody says, oh, there just isn't any information. It is probably the most studied drug in history. If you look at certain, I'm trying to think of what the drug was. I think it was like Ambien, there was like 400 studies. You look at cannabis, there's over 10,000 studies that have been done on it. We do know what works and what doesn't work. But what they found is, and this group was extraordinarily conservative. I disagree with quite a bit of what's in there as far as what they have discounted as research. As a researcher myself, I see, okay, you guys are splitting some hairs here. It's coming from a yes, but instead of and. So, but the one thing that they did say that was so exciting is that cannabis does in fact work and has been proven, and we can use the word proven now, to be effective against chronic pain in adults. It also happens to work in kids, but it also in adults. That's where the studies have been done. And so this is really, really good news for all of us to be able to have the legitimization of this so that we can actually go to our doctors and ask for help. Now, this is from the European Journal. The impact factor is not quite as high on this one. There were a couple of things in the study that I took issue with, as far as the way that they showed how the receptors are actually located within the body. But the reality is, even with that, they showed that when you use a synthetic agonist on the CB2, that it actually gets rid of a lot of the pain that you have and a lot of the issues, especially red allodonia. It's amazing what it can do just by stimulating these receptors, the CB2 receptors. The CB2 receptors, as I'll get into in a minute, is more closely associated with the microglials and the inflammation, because it is the ones that, you know, if we go back to that that body where I showed the receptors, they're the ones that are associated with the immune system and the immune response. So the fact that they're doing work to get rid of, to see if we activate these receptors, is it going to work to help the pain in CRPS? And the answer is yes. And then this last one here, it's showing that anandamide levels. Anandamide is an endogenous cannabinoid that we all have within our bodies. You know, the body is an amazing thing, but it doesn't have a system within it because someday people might smoke weed. You know, it just doesn't work that way. We have the natural, it's within our body, and we have endogenous cannabinoids. In other words, internally within our bodies. We have some CB1 receptors, we have CB2 receptors that we know of so far. There's more work going on. Some people have looked at GPR55. It turns out it's not a receptor. But we have 2 identified endogenous cannabinoids at this point. One of them is known as anandamide, which comes from the Sanskrit for bliss, and one of them is 2-AG. And so these are the things within our bodies that are produced naturally. You know, we talk about breast milk being so important for newborns. Well, one of the reasons that breast milk is so important is because it boosts the immune system because of all of the anandamide that is in the breast milk. So it makes so people that say, oh, cannabis is bad for babies, they're having it from the time they're in the womb and they're being born. It's their part of their sustenance. So you know, it's just a matter of demystifying it. I think that'll help people along in understanding that. The endogenous cannabinoids, when they are activated, and you have that anywhere you have a source of pain, and I'll get into that in a diagram in a minute, you have the presence of these receptors. So you have something to target. You also are showing in this case where there's an injury that you have the more production of the anandamide, which is the endogenous cannabinoid that I mentioned previously, so that you have all these ways that naturally the body is trying to fight. It's trying to create the homeostasis or the balance within your body with the endogenous cannabinoids. All right, so the activation of the CB1 receptors. I want to show you. I want to take you through right here. This is showing. Imagine this being coming from wherever the source of the pain is, and this being at your spinal cord. This is, you know, neuron 1, neuron 2, presynaptic, postsynaptic. So you have here that when you have the pain that occurs, when you have the injury or the insult to you that occurs, what happens is it then releases these. Well, in here are a lot of neurotransmitters. So you have the calcium ion pump, and the calcium is released, which then takes the neurotransmitters. They end up then going as part of the actual outside membrane of the neuron. They drop down this, and it goes down into the spinal cord, down into the base of your spinal cord, and then takes you through, and it goes back up then to your brain, and it repeats it, and it tells you pain, pain, pain. Well, the CB1 receptor here, this thing that looks like a radiator, this is actually the CB1 receptor that is when the cannabinoids are the endogenous cannabinoids like the anandamide, it'll actually activate the CB1 in a healthy person. It'll activate the CB1 receptor here in this case, in which case what it does is it's the most fascinating thing because it's on the outside of the brain of the neuron. It'll actually do something that's just not really heard of. It's kind of like salmon swimming upstream, and that is that it sends the signal back from the post to the pre, and it says, nope, I don't accept that. I don't accept that. And it keeps the neurotransmitters from being released so that you don't end up having this pain, the cascade that occurs. So that it actually, it's like, nope, not going to happen. Don't accept. Don't accept it. The problem is, one of us, when we're in really severe pain in the chronic, we have insufficiency within our body to tackle this, which is why we have to have exogenous cannabinoids or phytocannabinoids, plant-based cannabinoids, or external. Same way if you were vitamin C deficient, you might take a supplement, you might drink lots of orange juice. If you're vitamin D3, you'll take it. If you don't get enough sunlight and you don't have the ability to, you might take a supplement. If you think of it in terms of just using something outside the body that normally is within the body but that you don't have enough of, you'll see that it's very, it makes perfect sense why it works. It's just something that activates the receptors, which is what we're trying to do. Everything is about activation of receptors. It's not about getting high. It's not about, THC doesn't get you high. The activation of the CB1 receptors in your brain, if you take over a therapeutic dose, is what gets you high. Okay, so let's be very clear. The same way that if you take a therapeutic dose of anything, you might feel a little bit better, but you're not going to feel altered until you take too much. So that's something to keep in mind with this. So go a little bit further in. There's 4 different ways that cannabinoids can help to reduce pain. Okay, all of our cells. Okay, all of our cells have the ability to experience pain and cause this. Now, if you think about this as this is the epithelial cells, all of our skin cells, you have your joints, you have all these different parts of your GI tract, and then here's the neuron that it's sending out, and here's where it sends that first signal. So if we go back to that other slide, I'm going to be talking about this area here and what's happening. Okay, so by blocking the release of the calcium ion pump and by stopping the neurotransmission from taking place, we're actually to be able to reduce the pain perception because it doesn't make it to the pain perception area in your brain. It's like if a tree falls in the forest, nobody's there to hear it, will it make a sound? Well, there can be the pain, but if the signal can't get to the brain, you will not have the perception of that pain, which is why having it in your head, yes, it is in your head. That is where all pain is actually experienced, even though this all happens very, very quickly and it doesn't appear that way. The second way that it works is these CB2 receptors that are also on the cells, and we have found that anywhere where there's an injury or there's any kind of damage or to a cell, these CB2 receptors are present. All right, so we have something to target on them, and what they do is they reduce inflammation and they stop the microglia. So I appreciated one of our previous speakers talking about the microglia and how there's limited options, but there is one more option in your toolbox. I loved what he was saying and what the thing is, but this is something to be considered also when you're dealing with this. Now. Third way and fourth way is the first thing here is you've got the mood control area of the brain where you have receptors. And if you can stimulate those, the THC, you're going to have more, or any of the other ones that stimulate the CB1, then you're going to have an increased sense of euphoria, which is very important because people with chronic pain, I don't have to tell you guys, the depression and the anxiety and the lack of motivation and all that goes right along with that is enormous. And if you have the option to have something that's going to keep you in a better mood, why wouldn't you, without taking mood-altering pharmaceuticals that have a list this long of negative side effects beyond the fact that you might be too stoned for a couple hours, right? And then, of course, this is one that I think is truly one of the most important, and that's the reduction in the short-term memory, because there's also the receptors within the memory control area of our brains. So, the fight or flight, the, chased by the tiger kind of way of existing in the world that we've all, any of us that has chronic pain understands, it's like this constant, you get stuck in this loop of pain. And you do freeze with it oftentimes. But this is an opportunity to break that. Professor Raphael Mechoulam, who was the first one who identified the endocannabinoid system and isolated THC and CBD as components of it, and is still doing amazing research at 85 years old or 86 years old in Israel. He talked about the gift of forgetting. And, sometimes we'll treat patients and I'll say, after a little while, I'll say, how's your pain? And they'll say, you know what, I forgot about it for a while. That is awesome. That is a huge success, to just have a break from constantly having the pain be the thing that is driving your life, just so simply by having those receptors activated. We find with our veteran community, and I'm curious if anybody knows, have there been any increased cases of CRPS with combat vets that have gone on multiple tours over and over and over? Does anyone have any data or research on that? I think it would be interesting to look at. Yes, a hand back there.
I met a guy in Colorado, CRPS, PTSD, and he's getting ketamine treatment.
Right. Okay. I would bet that a lot of these people are not being diagnosed with it, and that the PTSD is part of the symptom. It's also it could be the stress trigger that we talked about before from some sort of insult or explosion or damaging things that they've been experiencing, and then they have this constant recurrence of the memories and the thoughts around the incident and the injury, and it becomes this vicious cycle that they can't get out of, where with the reason that PTSD is so effectively treated with cannabinoids is because it interrupts that fight or flight, and it gives them a chance to just be, at the same time increasing their mood through this euphoria by removing the negative thoughts. Okay. So I want to look at what to look for in your medicine, okay? This is very important, and actually for the people in California in particular, I want to stress that lab testing is now required by law. Yes, I would encourage you to take pictures of this, to take it to you if you do decide to go to a dispensary, or contact me, because obviously we can take care of anybody in the state of California. That it's important to understand that all cannabis is not the same. When I first started working with cannabis, and I came to this, just so you know, initially, I used to be personally on, I was on 26 pharmaceuticals. One of them was fentanyl patch. I was on Neurontin. I was on, you name it. It was disgusting how many drugs I was on. And so I had decided when I was going to become a grandmother for the first time that it was time to get my life back, because they weren't helping with the pain. That's the thing, is you just add these drugs and you're still suffering. So it's like, why am I taking all these? So I went through all the process of detoxing off of all these horrible medications and was still suffering, but I was like, at least I had my clear mind so that I could handle it. Because when you're in a fog from opioids and some of these other drugs, it's hard to actually meditate and get on top of it and do yoga and do some of these things. And we've got so much good evidence showing that using some of these other tools that we have, like meditation, yoga, etc., can really help to reduce the pain. But when you're on all these medications, it's hard sometimes to do that. So I was looking at, and then my husband, who has now been sober for 29 years, had broken his back, and he needed to have back surgery, and he refused to if it meant going on opioids, because the opioids that you go on, you don't ever get off of them. It's for acute treatment, and they treat them like they're for a chronic, because they have nothing else, so they just throw them at you. So we started investigating cannabis as an option. I was very skeptical at first. I was one of those people that thought marijuana was a drug, just like, heroin or anything else. And I was shocked. My first reaction when I tried it is I was furious. I was furious that it had been all these years, and I'd been to all these medical professionals in states where it was legal, and not one of them had mentioned it as an option to me. I was like, how can you let me suffer and have, gain weight from all the drugs and all the things that, all the horrible side effects, and not do anything, not just say, you know what, have you tried cannabis? So we want to make sure that is not something of fate that anybody else has to. And that's when we started investigating and doing research into this. So I want to tell you, when I first started, there was about, there's 125 approximately what they call landrace strains. Now these are medicines that grew in the wild of Afghanistan and Mexico and Colombia and Hawaii and all these different places. If any of the old timers like me, you've got like, Acapulco Gold, Kush, you got, Panama Red. I mean, these were the landrace strains. These are the ones that were identified very, very closely, and they're phenomenal medicines when used correctly, of course. I don't have anything against people using it in adult use and whatever, but it's just not the same industry I'm in. It's like saying, I'm going to make myself a salad, or with a tomato, or I'm a pasta chef and I'm going to make marinara. I mean, they both use tomatoes, but they're completely different. So it's stigmatized for all the wrong reasons, and that's just propaganda from the government. But when you look at those 125 medications, because of, cannabis has been around and being used medicinally for over 5,000 years. There's evidence of it even further back in Chinese medical texts, looking at some of the treatments from some of the healers that they were using back then. There's even evidence in tombs where they actually show cannabis that was buried along with for their journey to the next world. But back about 100 years ago, the propaganda wars started in the United States that then spread throughout the world that demonized this as a bad thing, and it's not. So we're really about 100 years behind where we could be, because during that time, the only people then that were using cannabis for the most part were the people that were using it recreationally. And so they started breeding programs to increase the THC, the tetrahydrocannabinol, which is in fact the part of it that's actually extremely important. Over 70% of our patients would either be suffering or not alive today if they did not have access to THC. I am so against these CBD-only laws. They are selfish, they're wrong, they're ignorant, and they hurt people tremendously. The problem, though, is all these different cannabis plants out there, they started these breeding programs where you had all this high THC because it was just about people getting high, smoking, getting high. And so a lot of the other, I think they've identified about 123, I think is the last time I looked, different individual cannabinoids within the plant itself. They were being reduced. You only have 100%. So if you have your THC up at 30% and everything else has to be divided between 400 to 500 terpenes, chlorophyll, plant matter, cellulose, and other cannabinoids, you're not going to have much room for other compounds within it. Since we've had legalization in one form or another for the last 20 plus years now, you have more breeding programs that have started to shift that. And so now you have more of your CBD, your cannabidiol, and your CBG, cannabigyrol, and some of the other compounds that are within the plant that also have really important medicinal benefits that are being bred up. The other thing is you can always take multiple medicines and take them together to have what you need, so if you don't find it in one product in particular. When I first started doing this, there was about between 2 and 4, depending on who you talk to, 1,000 different breeds, hybrids, and now there's over 12,000. So if you can't find what works for you, you're just not looking. Yeah. But the other thing is, on the flip side of that, is it means hope, because one of the worst thing that can happen is a patient comes to us and they have had, or a family member of a patient comes to us, which is usually the case in this situation, and they say, I know that my mother, my sister, my brother, my daughter, whatever, could benefit from this, and we talk to them and they say, oh, I tried it and it didn't work for me. Well, if you tried it, that'd be saying you tried one pharmaceutical and that pharmaceutical didn't work for you, so you're never going to have another pharmaceutical. Cannabis is no different. If you tried one, you've tried one. That's okay. So we know what not to use with you. So what I have on this slide here is to show you, these are the most general of the terpenoids, and the terpenoids are down here towards the bottom. And these are some of the cannabinoids that we have really solid evidence of them having analgesic, anti-inflammatory, or some other aspect that's going to be beneficial to you. So when you're looking for products, and you're looking for medicine, be sure to look for things and ask for things with this. And if they do not know what's in the medicine, ask to see the lab result. And if they won't show you the lab result, run. Go somewhere else. Go somewhere else. Very, very important. Now, just because one works for you does not mean it's going to work for the person sitting next to you. It's individualized medicine. And so it is important that you are very proactive in understanding what's in it until you find what works for you. Now, I'm going to just, one in particular, the pinene. You have alpha and beta pinene, and of course the terpenoline also. These all come from the same similar type of terpene. And all a terpene is, by the way, is what you smell, or a flavonoid that you taste from a plant that occurs in other plants besides cannabis. A cannabinoid are just the ones that are only in cannabis. So it's nothing magical about the words. That's just what they're talking about there. But pinene in particular got really significant, and it does synergize with the linalool. And linalool is like what's in lavender. So if you have gone for a massage, and there'll be some lavender scent on the pillow and maybe some on a burner, it immediately calms you. Limonene here, for example, comes from lemons and limes. Anyone that's ever been kind of down or tired, you go ahead and you smell a lemon infused anything, and it's going to be uplifting. So be aware that anything in a small amount is great, but the biphasic, you can end up causing the problem that you're trying to solve. And that's one of the things that with the pinenes in particular, because they do enhance, make you hyper aware. In cases, for example, with people with OCD and ADHD, they'll use profiles of the medicine that are higher in the pinenes because it gives them focus. But anybody who's in a lot of pain, you want to have your focus high, but you don't want to have it so high that you're focused completely down into the pain itself. So it is a bit of trial and error, just so you're aware of that. And if you can work with a medical professional or somebody who acts as like a doula for you to help you to do this, it can be beneficial. But it's very important that you take copious notes and that you are sure of what's in it, so you know what's working and what's not. So how much to take? This is the question, and this is the $64,000 question, and frankly the answer is I won't know. What you take may not be anything like what the next person takes. What I've done though is, because we have data on many thousands of patients that we've been following for many years with feedback, we know pretty well what's working on average for people that are suffering with chronic pain. All right, and so the first thing that we suggest is that you use on the THC, the one that does in fact activate the CB1 and CB2 receptors, that you a target dose of about 30 milligrams per day. Now, depending on how you take this, some people have an extraordinarily low tolerance, and they use like a microdose in the morning. They might use 1 to 2 milligrams and then take the rest of it before bed, or so that they sleep through most of it, and they find that they sleep much more restfully and they wake up feeling better. We suggest that you use either something that comes in the form of a sublingual, so that you have the higher bioavailability. Now, smoking it is the highest bioavailability, but it's also the shortest lasting. And so I only suggest the smoking for breakthrough symptoms. And smoking, I would say, if you go for a vaporizer product or something like that, make sure that they're not adding artificial terpenes, that they're not using propylene glycol to thin it so that it goes through the vaporizer product more easily. Make sure you're still dealing with pure product. And there's a lot of really excellent devices out there for even vaporizing the flowers, so that you have the full profile of the medicine when you actually are vaporizing. But it really, the bioavailability goes way, way, way up, and then it goes way down. When you take it with sublingually or ingesting it, you're going to have a much slower rise, and that's how people get in trouble with edibles. They'll say, oh, I took it and I didn't feel it, so I took more, and then it all hits. But it goes like this, and then it just kind of stays there for 6 to 8 hours. So you're going to have a much longer term, because you don't want, I've had people come to me that were managing their condition with smoking, but I'm like, how do you hold a job when every hour you have to run out to your car and get high, and then you come back in smelling like a dorm room? It's not an effective treatment. So if you find plus it makes you too medicated if you're not careful very, very easily. So it's very important that when you do take it, that you take it in a form that's going to give you a longer term, and not have to turn it into your lifestyle, and not have to turn it into something that you have to do all day long. people do not comply with medications when they have to take them 3 times a day the way that they do when it's 2. So, if you can do it in the morning, you can do it in the end of the day, that's really going to be most beneficial. Now also in the CBD, the cannabidiol, this is phenomenal on the other systems within your body. It's a weak antagonist for the CB1 and CB2 receptors. So it's not like you can say, oh, I don't want the THC, I'll just take the CBD and it'll do the same thing. It will not activate the receptors in your body. It works on other systems within your body. But it also is truly one of the most phenomenal options we have as a neuroprotectant and an anti-inflammatory agent. In fact, the federal government has a patent on CBD as a neuroprotectant. Just as a side thing, a patient of ours' wife had a stroke a couple weeks ago, and I said, did you give her CBD? And he's like, oh, no, I didn't think of it. He gave it to it, and he called me a couple nights ago, and he's like, thank you so much. She's already, her face is already better, her speech is getting better, she's responding much more quickly than she would have. And, in a perfect world, every EMT would have some CBD within their toolkit on there so that when people do have a stroke or a seizure, that they can give it to them very, very quickly, and hopefully save some of the other damage that's done to the destruction of the peripheral cells. And then, of course, topicals. I can't say enough good things about topicals. Just getting the relief through that. And the nice thing about topicals in particular is you can use it as many times as you want. It's not going to get you high. It's just not going to. I mean, and if it does, I'm going to take a look at maybe there being a little bit of a placebo effect that's going on. Because even though you do have in your epithelial cells, you do have the receptors, you would have to use an enormous amount. I had one patient that was using it on his scalp for precancerous lesions, and he swore that he got stoned from it. And I guess it's a subjective thing, but I've also had far more people that have said, oh my God, all I know is it relieved my pain, thank you, thank you. So if you have an option to get a good topical, I would suggest it. And then the last thing here is I think that we've made these points pretty well. Obviously, it has a lot of medical benefits that I did not go into today, but it's a phenomenal thing because if you think about what homeostasis is, if you think about having balance within your systems and having them all being regulated properly, and this is a system to regulate it, and this is the medicine that can actually make that system work better, it just makes perfect sense that that's actually what would work. We have to have it available to everybody, no matter where they live, that they have options to use this medicine in the best way possible and not being legislated to them. It's proven to be effective against pain, and there's more to cannabis than THC and CBD. You have to know about the terpenes and the other cannabinoids that are in there as well. But yes, we do need more research, absolutely 100%. And that's it. Thank you. So the question is about the cost. It's actually a very undemocratic medicine. I'm not gonna lie. There's nothing equal access, not only because of geographic limitations, but also financial limitations. It is expensive and it is not covered by insurance. The beauty of it is you can also grow your own. Now you're not going to grow top quality unless that just happens to be something you're good at, but you can grow your own and make some basic tinctures and infusions and topicals out of this medicine if you need to. You have the right to grow it and make it yourself, not to give it to anybody else, but for your own. But as far as the insurance industry, Canada is leading the way in some ways. Some of the ways they're crazy in the way they're doing it, but one of the things that is they now have it it is covered by insurance in Canada, so that it's actually is available to more people. And I keep hearing more and more about states changing things where you have your health savings account that you can actually put money into each year and have it go towards tax deduction, pre-tax dollars. Some places are allowing you to use those pre-tax dollars to buy it, but we have a lot more to do. And the problem is this is not an FDA track drug. This is a nutraceutical track drug. And so we're not going to, I don't think, ever have the kind of acceptance and coverage from the insurance industry. I think what's going to happen, though, is they're going to start seeing how much money they're saving from having people have access to this medicine instead of opioids and some of the other and surgeries. I mean, we have a patient, for example, not a pain patient. He actually has hepatocellular carcinoma. Came to us as a 11-year-old boy with, cancer, and the doctors at Cedars-Sinai are saying, oh, he needs a liver transplant. And we're saying, actually, you can't get rid of cancer by getting rid of the organ. It just doesn't work that way. And sure enough, the family went with the liver transplant, and a year later, when those same hepatocellular carcinoma cells were in his lungs, then they came back to us. And now this little boy is 14, and he's great. He's going to school. In fact, he just played at the Rose Bowl, or whatever it is, in LA with Coldplay, performing for a fundraiser there. So there is, for lots and lots of diseases, and an insurance company would be nuts, because the cost of giving him 125 milligrams a day of CBD and 10 milligrams a day of THC versus a liver transplant and all the supporting pharmaceuticals that are required once you have transplanted an organ, it's just math, and they'd be crazy not to go with it. So, thank you.
Okay.